In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to use the Forth Armoury template and mandrels to create a reproduction of the 1855 British Enfield cartridge. Now, I've designated this the 1855 style of cartridge because the period sources that demonstrate how to make the patterns date to 1854 and 1856. But in fact, it's likely that this style of cartridge, or one very similar to it, was what was used from the outset of the development of ammunition for the pattern 1853 musket. The very first iterations of this ammunition utilized a smooth-sided Pritchett bullet with a shallow cavity. It was 0.568 inches in diameter. But by 1855, it was found that the Pritchett bullet wasn't able to expand sufficiently to account for the full variation in diameters of the bullet and diameters of the bore of the muskets. And so, in some conditions, it was possible to have more windage than the Pritchett bullet could overcome. And because of that, Hay reintroduced a deep cavity, smooth-sided bullet with an iron plug. And this was the same solution that had been used with the pattern 1851 musket before. The iron cup, however, was short-lived, and they quickly moved to a wooden plug. So this style of cartridge is definitely appropriate for 1855, but it's probably also appropriate for use with Pritchett bullets to replicate an earlier variant of the cartridge. And of course, this style of cartridge is also appropriate for Confederate reproduction ammunition. The Confederacy tried to standardize on the British Enfield style of cartridge all throughout the war. And there are surviving examples produced by Confederate arsenals of cartridges that are produced using this 1855 pattern. So let's talk about how to use these patterns and formers to produce ammunition. The first thing you're going to need is paper. Now, the 1855 bullet was still 0.568 inches in diameter. And because of this, it did not take very much paper to wrap up the bullet. And in fact, it had to be very thin, or you would end up with a bullet that was, when wrapped up, was too large to insert into the muzzle. So this is 9-pound onion skin paper. It's not cotton rag as would have been appropriate in period, but it's still a good approximation and a good substitute. The other kind of paper you're going to need is a stiffer construction paper kind of paper. This paper is just heavy-duty masking paper that you can get at any big box home improvement store. So to start with, we're going to make the outer wrapper. So we'll use our Forth Armoury template for the outer wrapper. And you'll need a razor knife with a good sharp new blade. And then we simply cut using the template. And there's an outer wrapper. Next, we'll cut an inner wrapper. And of course, I'm only cutting one at a time, but there's nothing to stop you from cutting multiple layers of paper at once. And finally, we're going to need, am I going to have enough here? Yes, just barely. Finally, we're going to cut the stiffener for the powder chamber. These are the 3 pieces of paper for making the cartridge. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the powder chamber. And the powder chamber consists of the inner wrapper and the stiffener. And you'll position the stiffener over the wrapper as shown. And we'll take the Forth Armoury mandrel with the hollow cavity on one end. And the hollow cavity end of the mandrel is positioned flush with the end of the stiffener. And then we simply wrap up the paper around the mandrel. Oops, looks like I might have been a little crooked. There we go. Once it's wrapped up, we'll take the excess paper and you twist and fold and press it down into the cavity in the end of the mandrel. And then we'll use the former that has a bullet nose shape, and we'll push this down into the cavity of the mandrel. That produces a nice hollow pocket that will receive the bullet. So to complete the assembly of the paper portion of the cartridge, now we take the outer wrapper, we take our powder chamber and the bullet, and we reunite them. And this can either have a bullet with the plug or without the plug. So I'll demonstrate without the plug. So we position the bullet and the mandrel and the powder chamber as shown, leaving about a ½ inch worth of paper protruding beyond the end of the bullet. And then we very carefully and tightly wrap the paper around the bullet. It's important to get a good tight wrap around the bullet. And at this point, you take the excess paper, and again, it is twisted and pressed into the hollow cavity in the end of the bullet. Now, if this was a plug bullet where we had used the plug, then there would be no cavity to insert the ends of the paper into. And in fact, the 1854 and 1856 instructions for the 1855 style of cartridge, they instruct to fold the paper over the end of the bullet. And that was an expediency, and they didn't change the cartridge design in 1855, even when they went to the plugged bullet. So because there was no cavity, they just folded the paper over the end of the plug. And of course, this was found later to cause a problem because without this crimp here, with the paper just folded over the end, sometimes when you went to load the bullet into the muzzle and you rammed the bullet home, the paper would simply unfold and the bullet would be driven home and the paper would come out on the ramrod head. And of course, that would cause all kinds of problems. You lose your lubricant and the bullet is now terribly undersized. But this is the 1855 variant of cartridge, and I find that without the plug and having that hollow cavity like the Pritchett bullet had to begin with, this makes for a pretty nice cartridge. So to finish, we remove our mandrel, and sometimes it's difficult to get it free of the powder cylinder, and so you just kind of have to work it loose and then push it back down in place. So that constitutes the assembly of the 1855 style of cartridge. To finish it, it would be charged with 2.5 drams or about 68 grains of musket powder. And once that was charged, then the tail of the bullet would simply be pinched and twisted into the end of the powder chamber. And that provides a nice convenient tail for later tearing off either with your hands or your teeth to expose the powder to pour down the barrel. Finally, this cartridge had to be lubricated. So the bullet end of the cartridge would be dipped in molten lube up to the shoulder of the bullet. So that completes the instructions on how to use the Forth Armoury templates and formers to make the 1855 style of British Enfield cartridge.